World quests, dailies, weekly events, the grind. Dread it, run from it, love them, loathe them, whatever. They've been a staple of World of Warcraft gameplay since its very beginning. Even before the blue quest markers showed up, we had a checklist of things to do when we weren't raiding or PvPing or dancing on mailboxes. By the way, I sound great. I'm not sick at all. My voice is at 120% ear-tickling pleasure. Thank you very much, and it's all your fault. You're just not listening right. Anyway, in today's video, we're going to give some early, pre-alpha feedback on what we expect to see in the Shadowlands endgame routine. And the TLDR is that it's more of the same, with a few twists. Okay, actually, it's a lot of twists, so keep watching. Of course, you're wondering, wait. We know literally nothing about what it's going to be like, Soul. You're dumb. Downvote. Not so true, though, friend. There's actually a lot that we can determine based on what's been said and seen. Not only that, but just like how the WoW team has learned from missteps over the years, we're going to identify a few issues that we're experiencing now. Maybe they'll learn from that too. So first, let's talk about Battle for Azeroth Endgame, the latest evolution of the endgame routine. What we experience here will play heavily into what we'll get going into Shadowlands. There's a lot to do over the course of a given week if we look at every queue, every event, and every expansion feature. One of the big minuses of Battle for Azeroth is the way content is tied together by Azerite essences, which I should mention is just an expansion feature that won't be around in Shadowlands. Essence grinding is the current flavor of the month in the argument over how alt-unfriendly World of Warcraft has become, and part of that argument includes the many things you can do in WoW these days that contribute towards your endgame. That's followed up by the pressure, whether it's real or imagined, that you must complete this much stuff, you must obtain this and that, or you have to feel bad about yourself. We're going to get into how Blizzard is going to address issues like those later. Let's take a closer look at 8.3 world content. 8.3 is WoW's latest evolution of the grind, bringing to us rotating dailies to provide reputation and resources. Instead of adding an emissary to rotate, the Veil and Uldum feature an overarching world quest that spans over a region to funnel players into specific areas. Every few days or a week, the region changes, and a new world quest will pop for a large reward. There's also a spattering of bonus objectives which for the most part behave like world quests, and a ton of rare spawns, some of which drop fun little toys and catch-up gear. These refresh every day, but when there's a world quest rotation, you get to see a new collection of quests, rares, and events. Everyone's got different feelings about daily content, so I'll just provide some personal feedback in a few bullet points. I like the big world quest. It represents freedom. An overgeared player can go all Dynasty Warriors on big packs of mobs and max their bar, and that's it, they can go home. But a freshly leveled player can leech off of others or click objectives. Efficient players will take on the extra objectives to double dip and otherwise be very picky on what they do. Once upon a time, these fill up the bar quests were trashed by the vocal community for being dumb and lacking context. Years later, with lessons learned, the flexibility that comes from completing activities, knowing that it's meant to contribute to a greater something later, like an end boss, made a big difference. I like some of the non-combat variety. Not every quest needs to be a kill quest. There might be a click quest, maybe a puzzle, maybe a jump on the bug thing, or burn the boats, or move the statues. Resource contribution would have fit here too, like in Mechagon, how you're being asked for fish or other resources. I don't like quests that ask me to defeat a number of rares, or find treasure chests for a number of reasons, least of which is that it's kind of a pain in the ass to fly around looking for these stupid things. In that case though, the easy solve would be to up the spawn rate or lower the requirement. Instead though, I just don't like the philosophy of making it a quest to find a rare or any treasure chest. It's like, I don't know, it's like why give a quest that rewards you for exploring when the exploration itself should be what yields rewards? Know what I'm saying? Maybe, kind of, sort of, no? I also don't like that these rares and treasures give a very, very small or insignificant reward. Only a few of them give anything other than some resources and catch-up gear, so this kind of communicates to the players that you've got to farm up as many as you can in a day to feel like you're making a contribution. But that's really busy. Like, that lends a lot of credence to the lol Blizzard and their time-played conspiracy. So here's what I would do if I was the king of WoW. Like, specific to this patch 8.3, I would make none of the rares drop coalescing visions, and instead occasionally flag rares as world quest targets, like juice them up with more HP and damage, up the spawn rate like a buttload, and have them drop a nice little pile of vision resources. Meanwhile, let the other rares randomly drop catch-ups or pets or whatever so people can farm them, that's fine. And Legion did a pretty good job of doing this in outdoor content. When Shadowlands was announced in November, the WoW devs left us a lot of juicy information that we'll use to speculate on the endgame flow. But let's get you up to speed on what Ian describes as its biggest feature that sells itself as a big part of endgame: covenants.
What is a covenant? The Kyrians in Bastion, the Necrolords in Maldraxxus, the Night Fae of Ardenweald, and the Venthyr of Revendreth. Covenants are also the #1 major feature of Shadowlands. So a covenant entails multiple things. Each covenant has its own large narrative endgame arc. Each one opens up at max level, depending on your choice, and will lead you through the world in different ways. Covenants bring with them an endgame progression system. There's a ritual known as soul binding, where as a member of a covenant, you can bond your soul to a powerful denizen of the Shadowlands, enhancing your abilities, unlocking new ones, and having a ton of customization there. There is no artifact power to grind. This is not a... There's no question that there are social pressures. There are things that make it feel bad to play alts, where if you're not doing X amount of things every week, you feel like you're falling behind. You're letting your team down, or you're letting your own characters down. We want to have a world where you can have goals to work towards, customization, differentiation, without the grind. Each covenant also has a home base, effectively, a sanctum. This is a cross in some ways between the Legion class hall, but also the general feeling that you might have had back in Legion playing through Suramar and restoring Shalaran and building it up from this dingy, dusty, dark hole in the ground into a base with a teleportation network and allies that you'd recruited. And as you work to restore your Covenant's power, you will benefit from that, but you'll also be making choices along the way.
So, Covenants are the Order Hall, the garrison of Shadowlands, only you can choose between 4 of them, and there's so much more to them that I'll get to in a bit. The Covenant campaigns are the threads that will support the overall Shadowlands story. Think of Legion, and how its many class campaigns told part of the story from different fronts before it all tied together later on. But instead of an artifact weapon to power up, or an Order Hall talent system to progress through, although that might be in there anyway, we get this thing called Soulbinds, which puts us in less known territory. Let's watch some more clips.
Soulbinds. Within the story of the Shadowlands, any 2 characters can choose to bind their souls together. But when these 2 characters choose to go through this ritual, each one will get some power from the other one. Here's some you might bind to in the Venthyr Covenant. On the left, you'll see Theatar, the Mad Duke. If I bind my soul to him, a passive ability I might learn is Arrogance. Basically, I deal more crit to creatures who have a lower health percentage than me, because haha, I'm better than you. Okay, the point here is that this is a way to unlock new power over time. After you get to maximum level, you'll continue to increase your character's power by increasing your relationship with these characters. You can also customize your relationship and the power that they give you with a new item type called Conduits. Here's an early look at what the UI might look like in-game. This is Theatar's ability. You can see up at the top there, that's Arrogance. That's where I'd get that ability. I have a choice for another ability if I don't like this one. Here in the middle, this is a Conduit where I've chosen to put in a survivability ability, which will give me DR, damage reduction, at low health. Alternately, I could put in this ability, which improves my healing. So without getting into too much detail, the point here is to give you a system which allows you to choose the soulbind which best suits you. You should be able to choose these for whatever reason you like. Maybe you like the way that Theatar's abilities feel. Maybe you think that Nadia is better because she has higher damage throughput. You can also switch soulbinds fairly easily as switching talents. Just pop a talent tome or whatever, and you can switch your soulbinds to counter a particular challenge. Okay, in addition, you're also going to get lots of cool stuff. There's weapons and armor which really reflect the aesthetics of what your Covenant is about. There's a mount, which is upgradable. So this is one of the prime ways that you can show how far you've really pressed your relationship with your Covenant. There's world benefits. In the case of Maldraxxus with the Necrolords, you can build your own abomination. We've called it Build-A-Bomb internally, where you kind of put together a head and arms and weapons, and he will follow you around as a bodyguard in that zone as a perk of being a Necrolord. Other Covenants will get different perks. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that there's a full Covenant campaign which kind of defines your endgame story, depending on which Covenant you've joined.
Okay, now we're much closer to fleshing things out. Within Covenants is this Soulbind tree that you'll develop over time, but your first step will be to choose your Covenant. Paul Cubitt chose Revendreth, so we'll continue using this as an example. Notice that he introduces 2 characters to choose as a Soulbind. On the next screen, he features the Soulbind tree, which shows us a series of boxes and diamonds, but check out the characters on the side. We see the 2 characters Paul introduced to us, as well as a third one. The first guy, Theotar, is selected, and up there, the first selection tier shows one of Theotar's abilities, as was shown on the first screen. Now here we go with the speculation. The different soulbinding characters are not unlike selecting a talent tree. Each tree will likely give us a different layout. The different soulbinds may or may not be immediately available for selection, but it's very likely that each level or tier of the soulbind tree will be unlocked over time.
Time gating.
As for the layout itself, the icons displayed as squares are specific to the soulbind you're teaming up with and cannot be changed, or at least it doesn't look like it. The diamonds are what Paul called conduits, and these can be changed. That much seems clear, meaning that the difference between soulbinds could include the layout and or what sorts of benefits you can get from non-conduit slots. One soulbind could have a focus on a particular role, a utility, maybe even a non-combat benefit like, I don't know, faster crafting. Actually, scratch that. Just don't, please, Blizzard, don't do that. I'm speculating that instead of repping up with a faction, although I suspect that there will still be factions in Shadowlands, you'll be repping up with these members of your Covenant. I'd go as far to say that they'll also serve as the emissaries you work for, and you're primarily rewarded with reputation with them that will let you progress down the soulbind tree to each member of your Covenant. Conduits will be something like an equipment slot, a glyph slot, whatever slot that you feel most familiar with. But what you'll be doing in practice is selecting your soulbind based on whatever their primary focus is, while slotting the conduit slots with things that make your character go boom. Notice that there are 2 opportunities to make choices within the soulbind tree, here and here. The selection on the left is linked to the conduit in the second tier before meeting all together in the third tier, meaning the conduit slot might be a specific enhancement to that previous ability. Also notice that each conduit slot is a specific color, and this one has a cute little lightning bolt, which we have no idea what it does, but it appears that not all conduits can be placed in any slot, or that conduits have different levels of quality, or both. This seems very specific, and because conduits are items, we have to wonder how to obtain these. My hopes are that these drop mostly from world content, and not group content like dungeons, raids, or the weekly chest, because I'm skeptical that players will get all excited to have conduits drop. It'll be like Legion relics all over again, and I'd prefer to have loot tables with more exciting stuff. I'm thinking maybe professions or a Covenant crafting table will make conduits. Maybe they'll be earned from doing world quests or emissary quests, something like that. But I can definitely see daily content being tied to developing the soulbind trees, which is good because 1, activating soulbinds equates to access to more optional power, and 2, because you eventually get to the bottom and seemingly are done with soulbinds. It's a finite grind until we, find out that there are Paragon boxes or something. Blizzard seems to be leaning away from the idea of the infinite grind, but soulbinds don't seem to have a very long endgame tail. That is, how long will it take to reach the bottom of the tree? And will it expand further down as the expansion goes on? But maybe it doesn't have to. Maybe progression beyond the tree will be to power up the conduits, or new, fancier conduits will drop over the course of the expansion. And what if there's a way to maybe, combine conduits to make stronger ones under like a conduits crafting system? I mean, this might be messy on the inventory, but now that I think about it, later in the expansion, it'd be easy enough to set up a simple catch-up mechanism, where in a future season, conduits just drop at a higher level or quality. But maybe I'm getting too specific. Another thing to mention is that Torghast, the roguelite feature also coming to Shadowlands, wasn't talked about while Covenants were being featured. So at the moment, Torghast is a strictly endgame system that you work towards, and not something that covenants or world content directly loop into. Let me try explaining this in another way though. Using 8.3 as an example, you have to do world content to walk into Horrific Visions, which, given its rewards, is an endgame system. And Horrific Visions tie into developing at least one Azerite essence, and that is, used wherever. I'm speculating that covenants as they are now only loop into world content. Covenants seem robust enough to stand up on their own, so we'll use this as an example. Imagine you're max level, and you chose Revendreth as your covenant, you log in to do whatever it is that you do. There are already a bunch of long-standing systems that'll follow us in Shadowlands, like weekly events, world bosses, battlegrounds, and so on. Maybe while queuing in for a battleground, you dip around and you want to knock out your Soulbind emissary. Cool. The emissary quest is just a big activity completion quest, just like in 8.3. Dailies, particular to your covenant, a spattering of extra objectives, and some juiced up rares that drop conduits or something. You wander around Revendreth doing stuff for your covenant, but there are conduit rewards elsewhere in Shadowlands, so you venture to these other realms and knock out objectives there too. Theoretically, you could have traditional reputations for the other covenants as well, not nearly as rewarding as Soulbinds, but more like the usual fare, recipes, cosmetics, and starter gear. Because it would be a real bummer if only your covenant zone mattered and everywhere else didn't offer a thing. This is still more of the same, just polished to be a bit more friendly in repetition, but with much more interesting rewards to work towards, and maybe, just maybe, less grind. But what about alts? How does that play into it? We have one more supercut to go through.
On your alts, once you have one character that's made it through this journey a single time, we want to say, well, we know, breaking the fourth wall for a second, that you as a player, you understand how the world works. We don't need to teach you how covenants work. We don't need to teach you about the Shadowlands. So let's just let you pick a covenant right away, if that's what you want to do. And so you'll have access to their powers permanently, and on an alt, you can level up through any of the zones in any order that you want. You can do the narrative campaign, if that's what you want to do, or you could go to Revendreth first, or you could spam dungeons, or battlegrounds, or whatever. Endgame systems like world quests will also be available. Ultimately, it's about giving the maximum number of options. And finally, you're welcome. And finally, I think one of the questions we ask ourselves is like, well, obviously, one of the things we see with people playing alts is there's a sense of wanting to rush through to get to the end game as quickly as possible. And why is that? And it's not just a WoW issue, it's something that happens in many other games too. A lot of the time, once you've been to endgame, you realize that a lot of things before then don't matter. And so why spend your time on things that don't matter when you should rush and get to the things that do? Well, why does it have to be that way? What if you could begin progressing on your various endgame systems, unlocking powers with your soulbinds and more as you're leveling up? So of course you're still, getting your levels, progressing through that story, getting your character stronger, but the progression that you earn will matter at endgame, and you'll be meaningfully ahead of where you were when you first hit max level on your first character.
So this is a pretty big deal, and I think this is a huge step towards making Shadowlands much more accessible for those of us who have many alts. Ian mentioned that at least some max level content would be immediately available for alts once you reach a certain point on your main. Maybe it's as lofty as a Pathfinder Part 1 achievement, but I'm going to speculate that you'll unlock this Alt Game Plus, I'm going to use that, Alt Game Plus, as soon as you at least unlock all the endgame systems like World Quest, Torghast, and Soulbinds. It's hard to imagine this fully though. Consider Battle for Azeroth right now, and that sort of structure isn't really there. Like, what could we work on if BFA had an Alt Game Plus? We'd be working on, the Battleground Essence maybe? And farming up Coalescing Visions? So BFA is a bad example. In fact, none of the expansions would work well under this sort of paradigm. What we're getting in Shadowlands is going to feel unique, but in what way? If we can choose our Covenant right away, that should mean that we can start working on our Covenant quest line right at level 50. World quests will immediately be available, allowing us to start working on our soulbinds and maybe reputations from other factions, covenants, etc. According to Ian, we can develop our soulbinds, queue for dungeons, run battlegrounds, or jump into any of the original zone quest lines in any order that we want. which begs the question, what isn't accessible while leveling? I'm going to speculate the usual suspects like Mythic Plus and Raids, like those won't be available till max level, and neither will Torghast, the roguelite dungeon. At least that's what I suspect, because Ian specifically identified the Maw, the zone where Torghast is located, as max level content. This kind of stops the conversation of why levels even matter anymore, but I know people are going to ask that anyway. It's great that the WoW team is backing away from cutting off so much content to be max level only, but at least in my opinion, and I guess my opinion aligns with theirs, there's still a certain context that Blizzard is trying to preserve, a welcome mat into the Shadowlands. Because imagine starting Alt Game Plus, jumping straight into raid content, and your gear clearly communicates to you that you do not belong here. Not yet. So when it comes to the Maw and Torghast, my hopes are that there's a relationship between the zone and the instance specifically. I'm going to campaign forever until launch that running Torghast should not have some fangled time gating feature of sorts. But I wouldn't mind it so much if you had to do things in the Maw, like farm a currency, and then pay a very, very low fee for each and every entry into Torghast. Like, think of farming nether shards for the Mage Tower. You did have to do some work, but it wasn't that much work, right? So let's wrap this up with a brief overview of how daily content can work out in Shadowlands. Logging in, we'll see a familiar emissary-like system, only this time it's our soulbinds that we're working on. Each soulbind has us go to a certain zone to complete activities, but there are also extra objectives and world quests to give optional rewards. Instead of farming up every rare under the sun every single day, a few rares get juiced up and given a world quest objective for better rewards, a lesson that I really hope is learned from patch 8.3. World content is going to reward the typical fare, from gold to basic gear, but more importantly, conduits, the items that will let us customize our soulbinds. Traditional reputations will be available from the other covenants that we haven't joined to make the other zones feel relevant, even though ours is obviously going to be the most important. And armed with what we've earned from the normal Shadowlands zones, every so often we'll travel to the Maw, fight our way through death into Torghast, and then test our mettle for even greater rewards. This is something I can get behind. Farming that feels a bit more meaningful, rewards that are worth it, and an extreme tilt towards alt friendliness ensures that the time that I put into Korok's Revenge leveling all of these alts was definitely worth it. I know that for the most part that you're still thirsty for information, so as soon as I get into the Shadowlands Alpha or Beta, I'll be sure to share it with you here on the channel, so don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to like this video if it was informative, and we will see you next time. Until then, stay safe, stay happy, and stay breezy.